Jestem Amerykaninem I mówię po polsku niezbyt dobrze, so I'm going to speak in English. In 1931, Winston Churchill wrote an essay called 50 Years Hence. In it, he predicts synthetic biology, nuclear power, cellular telephony, genetic engineering, and even clean meat. That is, growing real meat without the animals. Something that's just coming to fruition now. And in the second part of the essay, he talks about how, because the pace of technological change is advancing so rapidly, it's more important than ever that we take a principled approach to our work. This was a call to arms, but not one of Winston's normal cries to fight the Nazis. Rather, this was a call to use deep technology to solve the world's biggest problems. Now, the rhetoric might not soar as high as his speech in the House of Commons during World War II. We shall go on to the end. We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the hills and in the streets. We shall never surrender. But in many ways, this essay is even more inspiring. Because in the modern age, our biggest enemies aren't our opponents on the battlefield, but rather things like malnutrition, disease, and climate change. This is a graphical representation of the number of people that die from war in the modern age. Proportionally represented, this is the number of people that die from murder, that die from transportation accidents, musculoskeletal disorders, diabetes, non-transport accidents, infections, kidney disorders, digestive disorders, nervous system disorders, respiratory disorders, cancer, heart and circulatory disorders. This is just a graphical representation of the number of people that die from heart and circulatory disorders and the number of people that die from murder and war. But I want you to ask yourself, what have you heard about more on the news recently? Heart and circulatory disorders or murder and war? It used to make sense to focus on things like murder and war because those were things we could at least do something about, whereas many of these other problems weren't. But times have changed. Using deep technology, we can now solve many of these other problems. Now is the time for Winston's vision in 50 years hence. And this is why, with my partner Elamade, we founded 50 Years. 50 Years is an early-stage venture capital fund based in Silicon Valley. We support technology entrepreneurs that are building billion-dollar businesses while solving these big global challenges. And we believe business not only will be about solving big problems, but we believe it should be. And we believe the businesses that are addressing these problems will be the most profitable on a purely financial basis over the next 10 years. We believe that this trend will be as important as the trend from the desktop to the cloud or from web to mobile. We think the next big trend in business will be the transition from a profit-only business model to a profit plus impact business model. And it's super important to focus on these trends. It's one of the reasons why conferences like this can be so valuable. If you were an entrepreneur in 1975, you wanted to start a Microsoft and not an IBM. If you're an investor in 1994, you wanted to invest in an Amazon and not a brick-and-mortar bookstore. And if you're a developer, a designer, or a biz dev person in 1997, you wanted to join Netflix and not Blockbuster Video. So I'm going to go through a few data points to support my claim that this trend will be a big deal. And I only have a little time, so I'm going to focus on one of the biggest drivers, which is millennial attitudes toward business. And I think it's fair to say millennials are not happy with business as usual. Deloitte did a study of 7,700 millennials across 29 countries. And one of the questions it asked was an open-ended question: what is the purpose of business? And in that survey, a plurality of millennials, 47%, said that the purpose of business was to improve society and protect the environment. More millennials answered this than said anything about making money. Now, millennials also think business should make money, but they believe it should make money in the pursuit of more noble goals. Millennials in that survey said the success of a business should be measured in terms of more than just its financial performance. 87% said this. However, 54% of millennials believed that most businesses only cared about the financial bottom line. And what does this mean? It means they're unhappy. They're unhappy and they're planning to leave. 25% of millennials plan on leaving their place of work in the next year, 44% in the next 2 years, and 66% in the next 4 years. And this isn't just junior talent. 57% of millennials in senior management, this is C level or higher, plan to leave their business in the next 4 years. Any of you that run companies, work for companies, or invest in companies know you cannot build a sustainable, profitable organization if your talent is planning to leave in these numbers. And it wasn't just the goody two-shoes millennials. 83% of MBA students in a study done by Net Impact said they would take a 15% pay cut to work for a company that had positive social or environmental ends. And just to put this into perspective, 5 years ago, this number was 26%. And 5 years before that, it was 15%. 15%, 26%, 83%. This is a sustained and significant trend. Technical difficulties. And it's not just in the war for talent that this matters. It's also in the war for capital. There is a $30 trillion wealth transfer happening between baby boomers and millennials. Millennials have already showed that they want to align their spending habits with their ideals and their careers with their ideals. They're also going to want to align their investment dollars with their ideals. And so this $30 trillion will change the investment landscape as companies that are actually solving big problems benefit. And it's not just the millennials. There are already established non-millennial entrepreneurs that think about business this way. I believe this is a picture of Elon Musk asking, "What's the purpose of your business beyond profits?" So I talked a lot in the beginning about deep tech for impact. Now, why deep tech? I'm going to walk you through a few of the reasons we're particularly excited about deep tech, and I'm sure these are some of the reasons why Elon is too. One of the big reasons is that software has largely been commoditized. It's now so easy to launch a web app that literally 2 high schoolers over a weekend can launch an app and have paying customers. And what this means is that a lot of the low-hanging fruit in software innovation has already been picked. It's been 2 decades since the World Wide Web revolution. That's a lot of time for the easy wins to have already been won. In addition, if you happen to have a good new idea in a niche that no one has thought of before, you're likely going to have competition overnight. Because it's so easy now to build software, Any good idea will have a dozen competitors as soon as they launch. This makes for a very tough competitive landscape. In addition, the big players have huge advantages. They have network effects. They have channel distribution advantages. They have data advantages. It's now well known in Silicon Valley that Facebook often knows when an app developer's app will be successful before the developers themselves. In addition to that, the new modern tech companies have figured out how to craft small, nimble teams that can actually move at the same speed as a startup. When Amazon wants to launch a new product, they make a team of 11 employees only, and they isolate them as a self-functioning team. This allows the big players to move fast. So that's one of the reasons we're not super excited about software innovation. And so first, what is this thing, deep tech, that I keep mentioning? Well, very simply, deep tech is something you probably need a PhD on the team to pull off. These things typically start as research projects or come from academic labs. They're often based on breakthroughs in science. A few fields that qualify as deep tech are things like synthetic biology, medical devices, therapeutic platforms, space technology. And why are we particularly excited about deep tech at 50 years? One, the costs of launching deep technology companies has fallen dramatically. It used to be if you wanted to launch a company in any of those fields, the first step would be to raise $10 million. Now, on a $2 million budget, you can actually get from idea to product or prototype in a lot of these fields. And this is happening because there are underlying technological shifts that have radically dropped the costs. I'm going to give just one example, synthetic biology. So in synthetic biology, all of these advancements have happened in the last 5 to 10 years that have radically dropped costs. The first one is a technology called CRISPR. CRISPR allows for cheap and accurate gene editing. It used to be if you wanted to edit the genome of a living organism, you would need a team of scientists, quite a long time, a lot of money, and even then there was no guarantee that you didn't introduce errors into the genome of the organism you were editing. Now, in the United States, high school biology students are being taught to edit genomes using CRISPR. It makes it cheap, quick, and accurate. The cost of genome sequencing has dropped faster than Moore's law. A little over a decade ago, when the first human genome was sequenced, it took 10 years, a team of thousands of scientists, and $3 billion to sequence it. Now, the leading company in the space, Illumina, can sequence a full human genome in days, and they've announced that in the next year and a half, the cost will be $100. From $3 billion to $100, from 10 years to a few days. In addition, in the same way that shared co-working spaces radically drop the cost of starting a software company, there are now things like shared wet labs that allow life science companies to share lab space and therefore drop their costs. In addition, there are things like AWS for the sciences, which literally allow you through an API to send your experiments into the cloud, get them done on a robot farm somewhere else, and then get your results back. And this is happening across many different industries. I just wanted to highlight synthetic biology. So another reason deep tech is great is because you have hard IP moats. In deep technology, when you have some new core cutting-edge innovation, you can patent it. And legally, no one can do that thing the same way you can. This is something that really does not exist that much in software. And in addition, for a lot of these companies, there are maybe only a couple dozen people in the world that have the actual skill sets to pull them off. And so if you're a charismatic entrepreneur, you can go out, hire those people, and now you have a talent monopoly, because literally everyone who's an expert in the discipline works for you. Okay, so say you're convinced that deep tech for impact is a great idea. A lot of people ask, now what? And there are two questions that people often get hung up on. One, what are the world's biggest problems that I should be solving? And two, how do I craft technological solutions to these problems that can both solve the problem and make money? This is a really hard problem because there are a lot of problems in the world. I'm going to walk you through a framework that we use at 50 Years to figure out what the biggest problems are, and then I'm going to walk you through some examples of how people are solving these problems. So at 50 Years, when we started off 3 years ago, we started to make our own list of the world's biggest problems, and we found this was incredibly difficult. And then we realized that a team of hundreds of people had spent millions of dollars in multiple years doing this exact same thing, categorizing the world's biggest problems. I'm talking about the United Nations and their Sustainable Development Goals. The UN, in an effort to get governments and businesses and nonprofits on the same page about what big problems were, did this exact exercise. They categorized all the big problems in the world and set goals for how to solve them. Now, this list is far from perfect. There are some big problems that we would like to see on here that aren't. There are a couple problems that we think aren't as important as maybe the UN does, but it's a really good starting place if you're trying to figure out what the big problems are. It's particularly useful if you want to solve these problems through technology entrepreneurship, because it not only gives the big categories, but it breaks them down into sub-goals. So this is Sustainable Development Goal number 2, zero hunger. And as you can see, the big goal is by 2030 to end malnutrition. But it also breaks it down into specific indicators. So for instance, one of these is reducing the rate of stinting in children under 5. If you're looking to craft a technological solution in a business around this goal, this breakdown is particularly helpful. Okay, so now we have our list of problems. How do we go about crafting solutions? This is incredibly difficult because you not only need something that solves the problem, but you need something that can be a great business. At 50 Years, we like things that can generate $1 billion a year in revenue. That's no easy task. So I'm a big chess player. This is me playing world chess champion Magnus Carlsen. And for those of you that are curious, I did defeat Magnus Carlsen at ping pong. He then beat me in this game of chess. In chess, one of the key skill sets is called pattern recognition. And in chess, the way you develop your pattern recognition is by studying the games and the moves of players who play very well. And so we're going to do something similar now. We're going to look at some of the examples from the 50 Years portfolio of companies that are using deep technology to both build massive businesses and solve some of these big problems. So we're going to take one problem first to show the diversity of ways you can address the same problem. We're going to look at climate change. Now, we all know that a large contributor to climate change are fossil fuels and the burning of them, and therefore obvious solutions are things like solar or wind power or water power. But those are the obvious solutions, and I want to help us figure out novel ways of solving these problems. So we're going to look at some interesting takes on solving this problem. This is one of our portfolio companies called Memphis Meats. As Winston predicted in 1931, Memphis Meats grows real meat by farming cells directly instead of farming animals. So, sounds strange. Why would you want to do this? Well, it turns out that animal agriculture contributes more to greenhouse gas emissions than all of transportation combined. More than every single truck and car and boat and plane and motorcycle combined. In addition, it's reached the limits of scale and is still failing to feed the world. Because these animals on these factory farms are so closely packed together, they have to pump them full of antibiotics to prevent them from getting sick, which is a perfect breeding ground for antibiotic-resistant microbes, which then often spread into humans, creating massive health risks. And in addition to all that, it's pretty crappy to the animals. So Memphis Meats replicates the same biological processes happening inside the cow that cause it to produce meat just outside the cow, so that we can all have the same delicious meat we want without any of the problems. They've demonstrated that this technology works for beef, and for duck, and for chicken. And I've had their southern fried chicken and duck à l'orange, and I can tell you it's delicious. So Memphis meats is one of an interesting growing category. Oh, sorry. I'll also point out that in addition to climate change, Memphis meats actually help solve a number of other SDGs. By enabling the production of affordable, healthy protein at scale, they help with SDG number 2. By enabling the production of meat that's actually healthier for the heart, the CEO is a cardiologist, they help with SDG number 3. By eliminating food deserts, by having cities that can take control of their own meat production, whereas previously it only happened in rural areas, they help with SDG number 11. By eliminating the need for a lot of inputs to the animal agriculture ecosystem, they help with SDG number 12. A couple months ago, I was talking to Richard Branson, and he was super excited to invest in Memphis meats because one of his big issues is deforestation. And one of the largest contributors to deforestation is animal agriculture. Because Memphis meats grows the meat without the animals, it helps solve this. SDG number 15. So as I was saying, Memphis meats is one of a growing category of companies that I'll dive into called cellular agriculture. The idea of cellular agriculture companies is to replicate the same biological functions that cause animals to produce the products we love, just without the animals. I'm going to go over a couple more examples from our portfolio. This is a company called Geltor. Geltor makes gelatin recombinantly by engineering cells that crank it out. So what is gelatin and how is it made? Currently, gelatin is made by taking the remains of a slaughtered animal, throwing it all into a giant acid vat. The bones sink to the bottom, the hair dissolves in the acid, and the middle layer is extracted and put into things like gummy bears and marshmallows and other things to make it chewy. Delicious, right? Geltor just engineers cells to crank out gelatin. It makes a lot more sense. Not only is it more sustainable, but it's better for industry. Right now, if a gummy bear manufacturer wants gelatin of a certain consistency, they literally say, "Give me gelatin made from the remains of an old goat." That's insane. It's 2018, and we're modifying our food by choosing old goats instead of young cows. Geltor, because they control the cell and every part of it, can crank out gelatin that's formalized specifically for their customers. This is a company called Vitro Labs. Like Memphis Meats, Vitro Labs grows real leather without the animals. They do this by taking stem cells from an animal and then differentiating them into skin cells, and then growing those skin cells in an environment where the top layer is different than the bottom layer, so you get something that feels and looks like skin. They can then take this leather and they can tan it, and then products can be made out of it. They can do this for cow, they can do this for ostrich, they can do this for crocodile. This is a company, unfortunately, whose name I can't say yet, but they are engineering plants to express real milk proteins. The demand for plant-based milks has exploded. In the States, it's in double-digit percentage territory. But people aren't totally happy because soy milk and almond milk, it doesn't have the same taste and functional properties as real milk. So this company has engineered soy plants to actually express in their leaves milk proteins so that soy milk can have the same taste and functional properties as real milk, but without any of the environmental downsides. There are other companies outside of our portfolio doing this for fish, for eggs, for silk, and even for rhino horns. In 50 years, we're going to look back at the time that we used animals to make products as an absurdity. Why didn't you just make the meat directly, people will ask. So now I'm going to walk you through a few other approaches to the climate issue. So you see the diversity of approaches that one can take. This is a company called Solugen. Solugen makes industrial chemicals enzymatically, starting with hydrogen peroxide. Currently, hydrogen peroxide is made in what's called the anthraquinone process. The anthraquinone process requires these massive, massive factories, 7 football fields long. They take $150 million to build. They use petrochemical inputs. They create toxic outputs, and they often explode. In the United States, these plants are not allowed to be within 50 miles of population centers because they're so dangerous. And every single year, one explodes and people die. Solugen has developed a 2-step enzymatic process. Their reactor could fit easily on this stage, and the inputs are plant sugars and water. And their enzymes crank out hydrogen peroxide as pure and as useful as that made through the anthraquinone process. They will soon dominate this industry and eliminate the need for petrochemical inputs, contributing to our SDG of preventing climate change. This is another super unique approach. It's a company called Starsky Robotics. Starsky Robotics builds driverless trucks. Now, you might not think climate when you hear driverless trucks. But as I mentioned before, transportation is a massive contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. One solution is to move to all electric vehicles, but that's going to take some time. Another solution is just to drive the vehicles we have more efficiently. One of the reasons transportation contributes so much is that we're not particularly good drivers. We brake, we gas, we brake, we gas, we brake, we gas. If all you do is take the current vehicles and run them more efficiently, you'll drastically reduce climate change. This is what Starsky Robotics is doing. Their key innovation is that autonomy can get there in 95% of cases, and it's the 5% of cases that's really hard. But if you need a driver in the vehicle to handle those 5% of cases, you haven't really solved any economic problems because you haven't reduced costs, and hence you're not going to succeed. So for those 5% of cases, they've built a teleoperation system where their trucks basically call home to headquarters, where they have a bunch of real truck drivers basically playing video games, controlling these trucks remotely. This way they can get 100% coverage, and their trucks are on the road right now. So now I want to talk about a different category of impact companies called impact infrastructure. These are essentially companies that need to exist in order for other people to build truly impactful solutions. And one example of this I'll highlight is called Astranis. Astranis builds small satellites to cover the Earth and internet in an attempt to bring online the 4 billion people who have no access. And just think about that number. There are 4 billion people on this Earth right now who have zero access to the internet. This isn't slow access or intermittent access. It's literally zero access. Think of all the SDGs you would touch by bringing those 4 billion people online. By enabling them to start online businesses, you can help eliminate poverty. By connecting them to free educational resources or allowing them to develop their own educational apps, you can help with SDG number 4 and improve education. By connecting them to the innovation ecosystem, you will boost GDP and help contribute to SDG number 9. And by allowing people to more easily track what their governments are doing and to mobilize if they're unhappy, you contribute to more peaceful and just civil society. SDG number 16. So how does Astranis do this? Well, Astranis' core innovation is very similar to the innovation that Google had around their server architecture. At some point early in Google's life, they were growing so fast and they were adding so many servers so quickly that that became a core cost driver for them, and it was becoming very unaffordable. At the time, if you needed more server capacity, you would go and buy a big, expensive IBM server and throw it into the server room. But Google engineers had another idea. They said, what if we bought largely off-the-shelf components, combine them with a few components we engineered ourselves, apply a smart software layer on top? This is what they did, and they were able to get 90% of the capacity at 10% of the cost, thereby drastically reducing their server costs. Astranis is doing the same thing, but for small satellites. There currently exist satellite internet companies, but they make satellites the size of this stage. They take 3 to 4 years to build each one, and they cost $350 million each. Astranis takes largely off-the-shelf components, combines them with some hardware they developed themselves, applies a super smart software layer on top, and they're able to get 90% of the capacity for 10% of the cost. Their satellites are about yay wide and yay high, and they can develop and build them in months instead of years. This will allow them to bring online affordably the 4 billion people with no access. We live in incredibly exciting times. It is now possible to solve some of the world's biggest problems with deep tech innovation. But it's not going to happen alone or by itself. It's only going to happen if we all make it happen. And I'm particularly excited to be here because in Poland and in CEE, there exist some of the world's leading research institutions. This region can, in particular, help contribute to solving the world's biggest problems and get incredibly wealthy by doing so. Now is the time to fulfill Winston's vision in 50 years hence. So I hope you all join me in doing so. Let's get to work. Thanks.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Seth Bannon.